We know how it goes every year when it comes to the beginning of a new NFL draft cycle. You'll have those established big name quarterbacks in college that get put high on everybody's preseason, way too early mock drafts and in the early portion of the college football season. You look at last year, if you go back to the mock drafts that were done back in June, July, August, September of 2015, you would have thought that the first three quarterbacks taken in that draft in some particular configuration, shape, and order would have all been from the Big Ten, and that the Big Ten was going to be the quarterback conference going forward. Christian Hackenberg, Connor Cook, Cardale Jones. And then as the season went along, that wasn't the case. And we see this happen a lot. Frankly, Teddy Bridgewater was a guy that was mocked to be a top 3 pick, and he ended up going at the last pick around 1 in 2014. It was Blake Bortles that went 3rd overall. That happens sometimes. These quarterbacks get another year of exposure. People really start to pay attention to them because it starts to matter now that they could potentially be hitting the draft next year. And some of these guys, frankly, get picked apart. Some of them have bad seasons. Some of them have different things happen. But, I'd point to last year's draft, and just because guys are off the radar in the early part of the process doesn't mean that they're not going to be factors when all is said and done. Like I said, if you go back several months before the 2016 NFL draft and you look at the mocks, you would have thought it was Hackenberg, Cook, and Jones in some configuration and order. And there were 3 quarterbacks taken in the first round in 2016's draft, but it was Jared Goff from Cal, Carson Wentz from North Dakota State, and Paxton Lynch from Memphis, respectively, who went in round 1. And other than maybe Goff, I know I was talking about Goff heading into his junior year, but Wentz came out of nowhere. Lynch most certainly came out of nowhere. So you're talking about 2 of those 3 guys really shot up out of nowhere, and the third one wasn't quite in the conversation of the other 3. So it happens sometimes. Guys can come in and put together a monster year. They get draft eligible, and all of a sudden, man, they get taken in the top 5 like Mark Sanchez in 2009. Blake Bortles, 3rd overall by the Jaguars in 2014. This stuff happens all the time. So just because a guy doesn't have a lot of experience doesn't necessarily mean he's not worthy of being drafted high or he won't potentially get drafted high. And as you look at this year's quarterback class, a lot of the preseason mocks, we're talking about guys like Deshaun Watson and Brad Kaya, and then somewhat Deshaun Kaiser as well. And lo and behold, as the season progressed, there started to be more and more of a gravitating towards Mitch Trubisky potentially being the number 1 quarterback in this draft, the guy that's most worthy potentially of a first-round pick, the guy that has the most franchise quarterback ability in the draft. And it's interesting how that happens. Granted, this is a guy, a former Ohio Mr. Football, redshirted in 2013, spent 2 years as a backup to Marquise Williams, of all people, at North Carolina, and only had 1 year as a starter. So you can't blame people in terms of the mock drafts out there in the media and what have you to sit there and not have thought of Mitch Trubisky because he couldn't even beat out Marquise Williams the past couple of years. But now he's got a lot of momentum, and we're talking about him potentially being drafted very high. You get concerned about those guys that are kind of 1-year wonders, but I have to say I totally agree with Trubisky's decision to declare. I look at Cardale Jones after the 2014 college football season. He leads Ohio State to the national championship. His stock was pretty high. Teams were enticed and interested. And in that draft, after Winston and Mariota, there was a significant drop-off in terms of the quarterback position. So Cardale Jones had a chance to see his stock even more artificially inflated than it already was, potentially go somewhere maybe in the 2nd round, and he should have declared. Because he ended up going back to college. He eventually lost his starting gig to J.T. Barrett, and come the 2016 draft, instead of being drafted in the 2nd round like he could have potentially been the year before, maybe the 3rd round at the worst, he cost himself a lot of money by ended up being a 5th round pick. Sometimes you have to strike when the iron is hot, and you have to go where the momentum is the most. Because if your stock is this now, that's the guaranteed thing. You don't know what it could be in the future, because even if Mr. Trubisky went back to North Carolina and put together a monster 2017 season, it's another season for scouts to actually look at him and look at him very closely. And when you combine that with the fact that the quarterback class for 2018, in theory, looks really, really good with Sam Darnold and Lamar Jackson and Josh Rosen and Josh Allen, you're talking about a really potentially good, strong quarterback class at the top. Trubisky could improve and improve a lot and end up being the fourth or fifth quarterback taken and unlikely to be a first round pick. So even sometimes if you're not fully ready for the leap, you have to take the leap. So I applaud Trubisky for doing the right, sensible thing in terms of his long-term financial picture. But looking at him as a prospect, is he the type of guy that's a kind of a one-year wonder or comes out of nowhere, flies under the radar, and ends up getting drafted high and being worth it, like maybe a Big Ben Roethlisberger? Or is he the type of guy that ends up being kind of a one-year wonder and he really ends up not being worth it like a Blake Bortles, a Mark Sanchez? It's really risky when you talk about these type of guys. The ultimate question, though, is do I think Trubisky is a first-round pick? Do I think that he's a first-round talent? Do I think a team should potentially tie themselves to him with a high first-round pick? Y'all must be crazy. I'm not saying he's a buster, and I'm not saying he's a bum, but he is way too far away and way too far away from being a finished product for me to be considering taking him with a top 5, top 10 pick, or even a first-round pick in this draft. I think that's just crazy talk. This is one of these things, knowing about some of the other quarterbacks, you have more familiarity with them, so it's easier to pick apart their game. When you look close enough at Mitch Trubisky, there's plenty to pick apart about his game, and he's still quite a ways away from being, I think, fully ready to take on an NFL starting gig. It's not to say, like I said, that he's a total bum or buster. There's some things I really like about his game. His accuracy and ball placement is really, really good. One of the best in this draft class. And what I really like about him, he's got an adequate arm. I guess you could say he has a strong arm. He doesn't have a cannon for an arm, but when you take the arm strength that he does have and combine it with his ability to spin the ball and locate the ball, this guy can make some really money throws. Not just good throws, not just really good throws, but those money throws, those special elite throws. And one thing that stood out to me watching Trubisky on film in 2016 is it seemed like almost every game he made one or two real money throws, like those clutch, elite, big-time monster throws. And some guys have that ability and some guys do not. Trubisky has that ability, and that's an impressive ability and trait to have. And for a guy who's relatively unrefined and lacking polish as a quarterback and lacking experience, his accuracy and ball placement is a lot higher up in terms of his strengths than it probably should be, or I thought it would be, honestly. I think he's a pretty solid decision maker. He's a guy that's shown some ability to hit the check down target. He's not afraid to throw the ball away. There are moments where his decision making can leave him a little bit, but there are worse decision makers in this draft, believe me. And I think also another underrated part of his game is his athleticism. Now, he's not a runner the caliber of a Deshaun Watson or a Deshaun Kaiser in this draft, or even a Patrick Mahomes II. But he can move. He can run. He can scramble. He's got a bit of dual threat element to him. Now, granted, you're not going to game plan a ton for him to pick up first downs running the football, but he has that ability to improvise. He has that ability to make plays happen with his feet. He can extend plays as a passer. He can get first downs as a runner in the NFL. I really believe that. And I think that's something when you talk about translating to the NFL, even though we look at Super Bowl 51 and it's a matchup of two pocket passers, kind of statues back there in Tom Brady and Matt Ryan, in general, the league is gravitating more and more towards those quarterbacks that have those dual threat abilities that can extend plays with their feet, that can go get first downs. And he has that, which gives him a little bit more of a chance if he was thrown into the fire early to be somewhat successful because he can kind of playground it. He can freelance. He can freewheel. He can do a lot of that stuff and pick up some yardage with his feet. But like I said, with a guy that's inexperienced, you would expect some big question marks, and he most certainly has some. Number one is his pocket presence. When I first saw him, the first couple of games I watched, he had a horrible habit of, as the pass rush came towards him, whether from the outside, off the edge, or up the middle, he had this terrible Rex Grossman habit of the best way to counter that was to completely turn his back to the pass rush and roll out to the right or the left. Rex Grossman used to do that, and he got murdered. And I hate when I see quarterbacks do that. Now, Trubisky is a little bit of an athlete, so he can occasionally get away with that. But you think about that. At the NFL level, you turn your back like that on the defense as a quarterback, you're really, really putting yourself in a bad situation because you are now taking your eyes off of the defense. And when you turn back around, you have to reset your sights, you have to reset your bearings and get your vision and be able to go back through your progressions down the field. And that's a really tough thing to do because the look that you had before you turned your back could be entirely different than the look you have now after you've turned your ass back around. And I hate quarterbacks that do that. You know, you see guys like do that in history, like Fran Tarkenton, and Fran Tarkenton ended up being one of the greats and ended up being a Hall of Famer. But you know, Fran Tarkenton was a better passer, you know, and among other things, and he was a truly special scrambler. And Trubisky's not that. The dude has to learn how to be able to stand tall in the pocket, do a better job of being able to recognize where his alleys are within the pocket, where he needs to move side to side, and when he needs to move up or move back to help out his pass protectors. Now, he's shown some ability to do that, but it's on a far too inconsistent basis. I don't like quarterbacks that have questionable pocket presence, especially if I'm talking about taking those guys high, because to me, a lot of times that can come into the feel of the game and the instincts of the game. I think you can improve a guy's size by getting them bigger and stronger in the weight room. I think you can improve their arm strength by having them throw more, working on technique, different things. I think you can work on accuracy by improving their footwork, by improving their overall throwing mechanics. You can teach them to throw to a spot as opposed to throwing to the receiver. There are things you can work on, but to me, pocket presence when it comes to feel and instincts, if a guy doesn't have that, I think they're in a lot of trouble. And when I see a guy turn around like that, that's a really horrible habit, which suggests to me that he's afraid of standing tall in the pocket and getting hit. So what happens if he does? His field vision. Now, he's not as bad as some of the other bigger name quarterbacks in this draft, but he's still got quite a ways to go. Far too often he locks into his primary target. So again, as I talked about in the Deshaun Watson scouting video, you know, if you just primarily lock into your first option, you're basically cutting off half the field. It's astounding that more college defenses can't figure it out. This is where his eyes are. This is where the ball's going. We don't have to worry about coming over to the other side because he's not going to do it. And he does it pretty consistently. You got to be able to see the field better. And some of that can come with more playing time and experience. And sometimes that's where football instincts can come from, is playing time, learning, experience. But sometimes they just don't happen. You know, so a Trubisky, similar to a Sean Watson, with as often as he was in a primary read system and looked at his primary target and at one side of the field, is he going to be able to mentally adapt to the NFL level? Is he going to be able to mentally keep up? I think that's a serious question. And I also look at the intangibles too. You're talking about a guy coming out of UNC as a redshirt junior with only 1 year of starting experience. 1 year of starting experience. He's going to be 23 come August. So as a rookie, he's going to be a 23-year-old with 1 year of college experience. This is a kid that couldn't beat out Marquise Williams the past 2 years before that at North Carolina. That's why he was only a 1 year starter, and that shouldn't happen. 23-year-old, inexperienced rookie at the quarterback position. Not a great formula for success. I also concerns me that he could be very up and down. When Trubisky's hot, he is the best quarterback in this draft class. There's no question. He makes those big money special throws. He has the ability to improvise. He can be fearless in terms of where he throws the ball. I mean, he has that it factor to him. You look at the Pitt game, they came back and won that game at the very, very end. And a lot of other quarterbacks in college wouldn't have been able to do that. Trubisky did. So when he's hot, he's hot. But when he's cold, man, he can lose his accuracy. He can lose some of his confidence. He's a little too up and down for my liking, and I'm sure for a lot of NFL head coaches' liking. Then I also worry about him in terms of dealing with adversity in difficult situations. You saw it in the Virginia Tech game, where the team got down early, he didn't play well, and it was all she wrote. I call it the Jay Cutler experience, where if you're in it early, you could maybe stay in it and have thoughts of winning the game. But if anything adversely affects you early, the quarterback throws an interception or fumbles the ball, it could be all she wrote. And I saw that at times with Trubisky, where if he wasn't at his best, then he was nothing. And he was terrible, and he might as well have been on the bench. And that's just the way it is. In terms of the NFL comparison for him, I've heard a lot of Derek Carr, and I just don't see that. I thought Derek Carr had his own issues, especially his footwork was god awful and atrocious. He threw way too much off of his back foot coming out of Fresno State. So it's easy to sit there and say, now look at what he did at Oakland, an MVP type of season, and say, how could you not think he was a top 5 pick? Well, when you went back and watched him in college, there's no way you would actually think he was a top 5 pick. But I think Derek Carr did other things that, frankly, were better in my mind than Trubisky. The guy that when I watch him, who he really reminds me of, honestly, is Andy Dalton. You know, people sleep on Andy Dalton's athleticism. He's a better athlete than he's given credit for. They sleep on his mobility. He's better at that than he's given credit for. Same, I think, with Trubisky. He's able to get first downs running the football, extend plays that way, and he's underrated with that ability, as is Mitch Trubisky. Guys with decent arm strength, but not special arm strength. Guys that when they're on can be very accurate, can make good decisions, but when they're cold, all bets are off. That's who he reminds me of a lot, is Andy Dalton. I don't know if he could be that type of quarterback at the NFL level because, you know, as easy as it is to knock Andy Dalton, there are far worse starting quarterbacks in the National Football League, believe me. You know, he's just maybe not necessarily that guy that's going to take you all the way or get you over the hump to make you a championship contender. But you can win a number of football games with Andy Dalton as your starting NFL quarterback. And the Bengals, for a 5-year stretch, 2011 to 2015, did that in the first 5 years of his career. They made the playoffs each year. So if Trubisky can come out of this draft and be an Andy Dalton type of guy, well, you won't be getting a bust ready for him in Canton, and you won't be talking about him being a great. And he's a guy that could maybe slip in and get a Pro Bowl berth or two down the road, potentially, and have himself a long, at least if nothing else, solid NFL career. At this point in time, though, my grade reflects where I think he is as a prospect. And when I look at him, you know, it's interesting because on the one hand, as I'm watching and as I'm doing different things, I'm formulating how I'm going to grade. Like you see the grades for the different categories for the quarterback position. And I sit there, and as I'm grading and thinking about what I'm going to grade, I'm also trying to pay attention to what my eyeballs tell me in terms of what this guy is as a prospect and where he should be ranked. And as I kept going through Trubisky's film and game footage, I kept thinking, this is a mid to late 3rd round type of talent. And eventually, as the grading bore out, that's exactly where I ended up placing him. So independently, in 2 different ways, eyeball test, the kind of intangible feel of what this guy is, and then the actual empirical data that suggests where this guy is, both agree that this is a guy mid to late 3rd round type of talent, and I think that's exactly what it is. Now, is there a chance he ends up going in round 1? Yes. Do I think teams are crazy at this point based off of who Trubisky is on film to sit there and spend a 1st round pick on him? Abso-freaking-lutely. I think there are some good fits out there for him. I think Cleveland, and being the hometown kid, he's expressed interest to play for the Cleveland Browns, which in and of itself should suggest maybe questionable football intelligence and life intelligence that you'd want to quarterback the Cleveland Browns. But I don't think it's any secret that Trubisky would like to be the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. San Francisco, you know, especially if they bring in Kyle Shanahan, maybe Shanahan could work some wonders with Trubisky. I'd like to take my chances if I'm San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan coming in, taking a young quarterback like Trubisky, because even though he's raw and he's got flaws, he's got some positive tools like accuracy and decision-making and athleticism to work with. You could do something with that. The Jets potentially could be a fit. It's hard to say right now because we're still more than 3 months away from the draft. We've still got the combine. We've got pro days and all this other stuff that could happen. I wouldn't be surprised if Trubisky ends up going in round number 1, if he ends up being the first quarterback taken. But if that happens, I think teams are crazy. And I think their thought process and their evaluation process needs to be re-examined. Because there is no way, and I emphasize again, no way in hell that this dude is a 1st round pick, let alone a 2nd round pick, let alone the best quarterback in the 2017 NFL draft. He's a poor man's Andy Dalton, and that's it.